The car swerved to avoid my sister, Camille, and hit me instead. 4 hours later, in a recovery room at Lakeshore Memorial, my mother looked at the 11 stitches in my scalp and said, "Thank God it wasn't her." She said it like a prayer that had finally been answered, like she'd been holding her breath since the ambulance called and could let it out now, safely, now that the right daughter was the one lying in the bed. I was the one in the paper gown. I was the one with a wrist in a temporary splint and a hip that wouldn't hold weight yet. Camille didn't have a scratch on her. My mother's hands weren't shaking for me. They were still shaking from how close she'd come to losing the other one. Nobody asked if I was scared. Nobody asked if it hurt. My mother asked twice whether Camille had eaten anything since the accident, because Camille got sick when she skipped meals, and stress made it worse, and the dress fitting was already going to have to be rescheduled once. I want to say I was surprised. I've had a month now to be honest with myself about that. I wasn't. 20 minutes before the crash, Camille and I had been walking back from her final dress fitting on Dearborn, her garment bag slung over my good shoulder because her arms were tired from holding them up for the seamstress. She was on the phone with our mother about the flour budget, not looking up, not looking anywhere but the screen, and she stepped off the curb into the crosswalk a full 2 seconds before the light changed. I grabbed her sleeve. I didn't think about it. 28 years of grabbing her sleeve. The car that swerved wasn't marked. No dealer plates, no go gray as a storm cloud, doing maybe 30 when the driver saw her and cut the wheel hard toward the curb, toward me, because I was the one standing where the car needed to go to miss her. I remember the sound more than the impact. A flat, mechanical bark, like something under the hood disagreeing with itself. I'd learn later that sound had a name. At the time it just sounded wrong, the way a stranger's voice sounds wrong when it's screaming your sister's name in a register you ever heard her use. The driver was out of the car before it had finished rolling. I remember his shoes before I remember his face, soft gray suede, scuffed at the toe, entirely wrong for sprinting, and he sprinted anyway, dropped to his knees on the asphalt next to me like the ground didn't matter. "Don't move her," he said to a stranger who'd already started to. "Don't move her, I've got her, just don't move her." He held my hand for the 4 minutes until the ambulance came, and didn't let go in the waiting room either, not until a nurse gently peeled his fingers off mine to take my pulse. His name, he told me, was Weston. Nothing else. Just Weston, offered like it was the only piece of himself he trusted me with yet. It was the insurance exchange that gave him away. A patrol officer needed his license for the accident report, and I was close enough, in a wheelchair with a blanket someone had draped over my knees, to read it upside down over the officer's shoulder. Weston H. Calder. The same last name that was on half the cars in that hospital parking lot, on a building downtown with letters 4 feet tall over the door, on the plain gray sedan I'd never once considered might belong to the company that made it, being driven, apparently, by the company itself. He saw me read it, he didn't try to take it back. "I test the new safety systems myself," he said, like that explained something. "Before anyone else drives them. It's supposed to be safer that way." I didn't have the energy yet to ask him what supposed to was doing in that sentence. My father, Daniel Sutter, died when I was 19. A heart thing nobody caught in time. Something in my mother simplified after that. She had 2 daughters, and one of them had always seemed like she might come apart if you looked at her wrong, so my mother spent the next 9 years making sure nobody looked at Camille wrong. I was 22 the year I understood that meant somebody had to absorb the looking. I never volunteered for the job. I just never got asked if I wanted it. I still remember the night it became official. If a thing like that can have a date, my father had been dead 4 months. Camille got into a fender bender in the school parking lot, not her fault, barely a dent, and came home shaking so hard that our mother, Renee Sutter, put her straight to bed with tea and a heating pad and canceled her own doctor's appointment to sit with her. 2 weeks earlier, I'd totaled my own car on black ice, walked away with a bruised sternum, drove myself to urgent care because my mother was already so overwhelmed. Ren, you understand. I did understand. That was the problem. I understood it for the next 9 years. I became the one who could handle things. My mother said it so often it stopped sounding like a compliment sometime around when I turned 24. "You're so steady. You've always been able to handle things. It's sort of your role." She said about the bills. About moving Grandma Sutter into assisted living. About the semester Camille dropped out of design school, and somebody had to explain it to the relatives at Thanksgiving without making it a whole thing. I handle things professionally now too, as it happens. I investigate insurance claims for a living, the ones that don't sit right, the staged slip and falls, and the fires that start suspiciously close to a policy renewal. 4 years in the Special Investigations Unit at Bellwether Mutual taught me that people don't lie with the big details, they lie with the small ones. A signature a half-second too smooth, a story with no loose threads at all, which is its own kind of tell, because real memory always has a few. I'd used that instinct on strangers for 4 years, it had never once occurred to me I'd need it on my own mother. The card came on day 2, pink peonies on the front, Camille's handwriting inside, loops so careful they looked traced. So sorry this happened to you. You're so strong. Can't wait to have you back on your feet for the big day. It should have meant something. For about 6 hours it did. I propped it on the windowsill where I could see it from the bed. Then a nurse mentioned, kindly refilling my water, that my mother had spent most of that first afternoon on the phone in the hallway with a woman named Vanessa Cordell, and I asked Camille later who that was, and Camille said, too quickly, that it was just somebody Mom knew, for the wedding website. Don't worry about it. I did not, at the time, know how to spell wire fraud. I want to be clear about that. I had no plan yet. I only had a small, cold feeling, the same one I got at work when a burn pattern looked a little too even. My mother visited every day. She sat in the vinyl chair by the window and told me, unprompted, about the florist's revised quote, the seating chart crisis with my aunt, Denise Kowalski, whether the DJ could learn one more song by October. She held my unsplinted hand exactly once, to ask if I thought the sage green was too much sage green for the bridesmaid dresses. I said I didn't know, I was on painkillers strong enough that the ceiling had started breathing. You've always had good taste, she said. It's not like you're doing much else right now. She meant it kindly. That was the worst part. She'd said something that would have leveled me on a normal Tuesday, said it kindly, the way you'd say something obvious to a child, and then gone back to her phone to text the caterer. A month, I thought. The wedding is a month away and I can't stand up on my own yet. My coworker, Nina Okafor, called that night, and it was the first conversation all day that didn't cost me anything. She didn't ask about sage green. She asked if I was in pain, and when I said yes, she didn't try to fix it. She just stayed on the phone until I fell asleep mid-sentence, the way she used to do when we pulled late nights on a case together. She'd started a GoFundMe the second night, she told me, before I could tell her not to. $40,000 for medical bills and lost wages. I told her that was too much. She told me to let people be kind to me for once in my life, and I didn't have a fast enough comeback, because some small, exhausted part of me thought maybe she had a point. Weston came back the next morning with coffee he'd clearly never made himself, in the sense that it was correct in a way homemade coffee never is, and a folding chair he set up on the opposite side of the bed from my mother's vinyl one, like he'd measured the room for the exact spot she wasn't sitting in. She talk your ear off about the wedding again? He asked, nodding at the door my mother had just left through. You can hear that from the hallway? I could hear it from the parking garage. He handed me the coffee, adjusted the straw so I could reach it with my good hand. For what it's worth, sage is a fine color. Committing that hard to a color you don't actually love is the part that should worry you. I laughed for the first time in 4 days, it hurt my ribs and I didn't care. He told me about his brother that afternoon, not because I asked outright, but because I'd wondered aloud why a man with his own last name on the hood of the car would be the one test driving it himself, and his face did something complicated before he answered. My brother Holt Calder died in one of our own prototypes, 11 years ago. Braking system failed on a closed course, they said, driver error, case closed in about 6 weeks flat. He turned the empty coffee cup in his hands like it was the only thing in the room he trusted to hold still. I was 19, old enough to know driver error doesn't usually get filed that fast when the driver is the chairman's son and there's a product launch in the spring. You never got proof. I got a dead brother and a father who's changed the subject for 11 years. That's not proof. That's just a reason to keep checking every car myself before I let it near anyone else. He looked at me, and something in his face made the sentence land differently than it had a second earlier. I've checked hundreds of them. I've never once needed proof as badly as I do right now. By the end of the first week, the GoFundMe had cleared $18,000, mostly $20 and $50 donations from people I'd worked cases, people who knew exactly what a shattered hip could cost someone with a high deductible. I couldn't check it myself. My splinted wrist was my dominant one, and the painkillers made my depth perception a joke, so my mother had offered warmly to keep an eye on things on my phone until I could type again. I'd said thank you. I remember saying thank you. The settlement offer arrived 9 days after the accident, hand-delivered in a cream envelope with a raised gold seal, like it was a wedding invitation, instead of $275,000 in exchange for never mentioning the words defective steering system to anyone with a law degree. My mother brought it to the rehab clinic herself, practically glowing. "They want to make this right, Ren. Isn't that generous? We could put a real dent in your medical bills and still have plenty left over for..." She stopped herself, but not soon enough. "Left over for what?" "For whatever you need. I just meant there's room to be generous all around." I asked for 48 hours and my own attorney before I signed anything. "It's the only smart move with any settlement," I told her, in my most professional voice, the one I use on claimants who are lying to me. "I need to see the engineering report this is based on. I need to know what they think actually happened to that car." My mother's smile flickered fast, like a curtain twitching in a house you'd thought was empty. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. For any of us." "I didn't sign it that day. I want that on the record, even if only to myself." I said not yet, and I meant it. And I went back to my exercises, and my mother left with the envelope still sealed, and for a while I genuinely believed the matter was still open. Nina texted me the day after the offer arrived. "So glad the florist finally worked out. Saw the Venmo notification, lol, tell your mom I say hi." I read it 4 times before it stopped looking like a mistake. I asked my mother about it that evening, careful the way you'd question a suspect you already knew the answer about, watching for the half-second flinch. She didn't flinch. That was almost worse. "It's all family money once it's in the account, Ren. I moved a little over to cover the deposit gap on the venue because your sister's card got declined, and I wasn't about to let her find out a month before her wedding that we were short. You weren't using it yet. You're still in the clinic 3 days a week. It's not like you needed $18,000 for a hospital bed. It's not stealing if it's still family money," she said again when I didn't answer fast enough, like repeating it might make it true the second time. I looked at the ceiling. I counted the water stain shaped like Florida. I did not say anything else that night, because I've learned at work that the moment you let someone see you've clocked the lie is the moment they start covering their tracks better. By the time I was down to 3 clinic visits a week instead of daily ones, my mother had learned the word Calder meant something, and it changed the weather in every room she was in. She invited Weston to dinner about 2 weeks after the accident, at her house, the good china out, a bottle of wine that cost more than my copay. I sat at the end of the table in a plastic and foam knee brace, because my hip still wouldn't let me manage the good chairs, and watched my mother work. Camille designed the invitations for her own wedding. "You know," she told him over the second course, apropos of absolutely nothing. "She has a real eye. Got it from my side." She mentioned, Weston said, not looking at Camille. "She's very talented, and so easy to talk to, isn't she? People just gravitate to her." "People gravitate to a lot of things," Weston said. "Traffic gravitates to accidents." My mother's smile didn't move, but something behind it did, the curtain twitching again. Under the table, where nobody could see it, Weston found my hand and laced his fingers through mine, careful of the wrist, and left them there through the rest of the meal, through the tiramisu, through my mother's third attempt to mention that Camille had once interned at a gallery Weston's family funded. He didn't say a word about it, he didn't have to. His hand said it for him, the entire dessert course. This one, not the one you're pointing at. Camille caught my eye once, near the end, and looked away first. I don't think she'd asked for any of it. I think she'd just never once had to ask her mother to stop. Weston asked me to come to the Calder building the following week. The first day my hip let me manage a full flight of stairs if I really had to, though he sent a car so I wouldn't have to find out. He wanted me to see the actual test data from the day of the accident, he said, because I was the only person outside the company who might read an engineering report the way I read a claims file, for what's missing. The floor with his office was quiet in a way that felt expensive. A woman about my age sat at a desk outside a records room, sorting binders with the kind of methodical calm that comes from catching more mistakes than she'd ever gotten credit for. Weston introduced her as Priya Nandakumar from legal. "Priya processes half of what crosses my desk before I ever see it," he said. "If a filing's ever been wrong in this building, she's the one who noticed first." Priya gave me a look I recognized. because I'd worn it myself at work more times than I could count. It was the look of someone doing careful, exacting work nobody thanks you for, work that exists specifically to catch the thing everyone else wants to rush past. Nice to finally meet the woman my boss won't stop talking about, she said mostly to her bender, and didn't quite smile, and I liked her instantly. It was Weston, not Priya, who told me about the crisis firm that afternoon, almost as an aside. His father's office had recommended Vanessa Cordell directly to my mother the day after the accident, he said, before the swelling on my brain scan had even gone down enough for a doctor to prompt me fine. Not a lawyer. Not a grief counselor. A woman whose entire firm existed to keep unflattering stories out of local news. My father's people don't call grieving families out of kindness, Weston said. They call the ones they're worried about, the ones who might talk to a reporter, or the ones who might not need managing at all, because they're already so eager to manage themselves. I thought about the peony card, Camille's careful, traced-looking handwriting. So sorry this happened to you. Can't wait to have you back on your feet for the big day. It hadn't been Camille reaching out to me first, that awful first day. It had been a stranger's script, handed to a 25-year-old who signed her name to it, because her mother asked her to, while her mother's real first calls went to a woman paid, to make sure nobody ever found out how the story actually started. I had been so grateful for that card. I had kept it on the windowsill for a week. I found the copy of the settlement by accident, before the month was out, sitting in a folder on my mother's kitchen counter under a stack of wedding invoices, while I waited for her to bring my crutches in from the car. Fully executed, the folder tab said, in her handwriting. I opened it because I am, professionally and personally, incapable of not opening a folder that says that. My signature was on the last page, dated the same day I'd told her not yet, notarized by a woman I had never met, at an address I had never been to at 2:40 in the afternoon, which I knew for a fact was 35 minutes into a physical therapy session I had a sign-in sheet to prove I'd attended. I looked at the signature for a long time. It was close enough that a stranger would never have questioned it. But I'd spent 4 years learning what my own hand does under pressure versus under calm, the specific hitch where the W in my last name catches before it releases, the way a real signature wanders a little and a forged one never does, because a forger is concentrating on getting it right, and I had never once in 28 years had to concentrate on being myself. This one didn't wander, this one had been trying too hard. I did not confront her that day. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it, under the invoices at the same angle, and I smiled when she came back with my crutches, and I let her help me to the car, and I did not say one single word. I told Weston 2 days later, in the parking lot outside the rehab clinic, both of us sitting in his car, because it was the only room in Chicago I could think of that wasn't bugged with 30 years of my mother listening, for exactly this kind of conversation. She forged it, I said. Somebody with a notary stamp signed my name to $275,000 I never agreed to take, on a day I have witnesses saying I was somewhere else entirely. Weston didn't say I'm sorry, which I appreciated more than I expected to. He said, then it's void. Forged consent isn't consent. My father's lawyers know that better than anyone, which means they knew it when they let the check clear. That landed about 2 seconds after the first gut punch and hit harder. What do you mean they knew? The engineering flag on the steering assist lag went up internally the same afternoon as your accident, Weston said. My father's team made first contact with your mother's insurance line 11 hours later. The formal offer took a few more days to draft, but the decision to buy this quietly and buy it fast got made before you'd even come out of surgery. His jaw went tight. Someone in that department looked at your file, at a wedding a month out, at a mother already stretched thin on money and image, and decided she was the fastest, cheapest door out of a liability that traces straight back to a defect that already killed one Calder. We sat with that for a minute. 2 very different women, in 2 very different rooms, had each been handed exactly the kind of trouble they were most built to fall for. My mother had been handed a shortcut to Camille's wedding. I had been handed, over a week later, unmistakable proof of both. I'm not confronting her yet, I said. If I do it now, she has time to fix the paperwork before anyone official ever sees it. I want the clinic's sign-in log first. I want Priya's file. I want it airtight before I ever say her name out loud in front of a lawyer. Weston looked at me the way you look at someone you've just realized you don't need to protect quite as hard as you thought. You already sound like the person who's going to win this. I've read enough forged claims to know winning isn't loud, I said. Winning is just being right in a room where nobody can argue with the paper. Priya agreed to help 2 days after that, in the same quiet, methodical way she did everything, which turned out to mean she'd already half done it before I asked. I flagged the notarization mismatch myself, 3 days after it processed. She told me in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the Calder building, her voice pitched low even though nobody around us had any reason to care. The notary's stamp registration doesn't match any active commission in Cook County that week. I noticed because catching that kind of thing is literally my job. I just didn't know yet whose signature it was attached to, or what I was supposed to do once I did know. Why not report up the chain? She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn, the same small motion Weston did his, months and worlds apart. I'm 2 years into a work visa. Calder Automotive sponsors. If I report a forged settlement tied to a defect flag my own department is sitting on, and it turns out my supervisor already knew, I'm not the whistleblower in that story, I'm the liability. I needed to know I wasn't the only name on the file before I put mine on it. You're not, I said. You've got mine, you've got Weston's, you've got a clinic sign-in sheet that makes the notary's timestamp a physical impossibility. Then I've already backed the whole file up somewhere Calder's server logs can't touch it. Priya said, so evenly it took me a second to understand she'd just told me she'd been ready to do this for weeks, and only been waiting for someone to make it safe. Habit, from a job before this one. I don't hand anyone a single copy of anything that matters. I thought not for the first time that I would have hired her in a heartbeat at Bellwether. My mother noticed the change in me before I said a single word, because mothers notice absence better than presence, and I'd gone from careful and grateful to simply quiet, and quiet, on me had never once meant nothing. 9 days before the wedding, she called it protecting my recovery. That was the phrase she used when she showed up at my apartment unannounced, packed a bag for me herself, and told me I was moving into her guest room until the wedding was over. Doctor's orders. Easier for everyone. You shouldn't be alone right now anyway. I didn't have a doctor who'd ordered any such thing. I had a mother who had found on my kitchen counter a printed copy of a clinic sign-in log I hadn't been careful enough about hiding. She took my phone charger so it wouldn't get lost in the move. She let my battery die on day 2 and was, regrettably, always just about to find her spare cable for me. She mentioned to my doorman that I was staying with family and not to worry if anyone came looking, in case I'd forgotten to say. She smiled the whole time. She asked twice a day if I was feeling better yet, like better was a location I could simply decide to arrive at. On the 7th day, Priya texted Weston instead of me, because my phone was a brick in a drawer 40 feet from where I sat. The notary registration database just flagged for an unrelated audit. If anyone connects the dots to our file before we're ready, I don't know how much longer that document exists in any form Calder's system will admit to. Weston showed up at my mother's house that evening with a box of the good cannoli from the bakery she loved, charming and unbothered, and asked in front of her whether I felt up to a short walk. Doctor's orders, he said. Good for circulation after a hip injury. He'd read all about it. My mother, who had spent weeks trying to make this man fall in love with the idea of our family, could not find a single polite way to say no to the man whose last name might still write her daughter's wedding a very generous check. I made it 4 houses down the block before I said it out loud. She's not protecting my recovery. She's protecting the wedding from me. I know, Weston said. That's why I brought your charger. It was still sitting in your kitchen. I let myself imagine you'd left it there on purpose. I hadn't. I took it anyway, and for the first time in a week, my phone came back to life in my hand like something surfacing from underwater. There were 14 messages from Priya waiting for me, and 1 voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A reporter from the Tribune's business desk, the kind who covers Calder Automotive full-time, who'd apparently heard through channels she wouldn't name that the company's safety division was sitting on something ahead of Thursday's board vote. Weston hadn't leaked it. He didn't need to. His father's own people had been so thorough about managing the story that they'd finally made enough noise doing it to attract exactly the attention they'd spent weeks trying to avoid. The board votes Thursday morning on the Gen 4 rollout. Weston told me the night before the wedding, both of us back in his car, which had somehow become the only room in Chicago where either of us said anything true. I've had the defect data ready for a week. I was only waiting on 1 more voting member to come around. He came around an hour ago. The wedding's Thursday afternoon. I know, He didn't ask if that felt like too much. He already knew it was exactly enough. Your mother invited half my father's board to that reception, hoping it would look good for Camille's father-in-law's business contacts. She built us a room, Ren. I'm only going to make sure the right people are standing in it when the vote result comes through. I thought about 11 stitches. I thought about a folder under a stack of invoices, a signature trying too hard to be mine. I thought about my mother's voice in a hospital room, thank God it wasn't her, and how long I'd let that sentence live rent-free in my chest, like it was a verdict instead of just one frightened woman's worst moment on the worst day of my life. Okay, I said, Thursday. The Marion Club sits right on the water, all glass and good lighting, built for exactly the kind of photographs my mother had been planning since Camille was 6 years old. I arrived in my nice dress and my one good pair of flats, because my hips still didn't trust heels, on Weston's arm, with a folder in my clutch purse that weighed considerably more than a clutch purse should. My mother saw us cross the room and her whole face lit up in a way I hadn't earned in 9 years and knew, immediately, wasn't actually about me. You made it, she said, kissing the air near my cheek, already looking past me at Weston. Doesn't she look wonderful, considering? She looks like herself, Weston said, which was somehow the coldest thing anyone said to my mother all night, and she didn't even notice. The toasts happened. Camille cried the pretty kind of crying, the kind that doesn't smudge anything, and Grant Whitaker said something sweet about finding the one person who made every room feel less crowded, and I meant it when I clapped, because whatever else was about to happen, my sister marrying a decent, kind man was not the part of this story I any interest in ruining. Weston's phone buzzed at 7:52. He read it and something in his shoulders went very still and very sure, the way I imagine a man looks right before he finally sets down something heavy he's been carrying for 11 years. The board just voted, he said quietly just to me. 9-2. Gen 4's on full recall as of tonight, every unit already delivered. My father's stepping down as chairman effective immediately. The release goes to press in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, I repeated. I thought you'd want a little warning. At 8:03, a young woman with a Calder Automotive lanyard I recognized from the office found Priya's contact and stepped just inside the ballroom doors, holding a courier envelope like it might go off. Priya had sent it that afternoon, certified addressed to me, because she'd decided in the end that some things shouldn't only exist as a text message. I opened it at the edge of the dance floor. Inside was her written statement about the notary mismatch, a certified copy of the clinic's electronic sign-in log, with physical therapy timestamp printed clean and official beside the notary's impossible one, and a short, formal letter voiding on the basis of forged consent, a settlement neither Calder Automotive's own legal department nor I had ever properly executed. I found my mother by the cake table mid-sentence with Grant's aunt about seating charts. I need 5 minutes, I said. Ren, honestly now is not the... I know exactly what time it is. I kept my voice as level as I could make it, the voice I use across a conference table when I already know and the other person doesn't know I know yet. I need you to look at something before a Tribune reporter calls this venue asking why Calder Automotive quietly settled with a woman who never signed anything. My mother's face did the curtain twitch, and this time it didn't stop at a twitch, it fell all the way open. I was trying to fix things, she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it over the band. For all of us, you weren't even using the money yet, you were still doing your exercises. I thought I had time to. You had time to notarize a signature at an address I've never been to, during a physical therapy session I have a sign-in sheet for. That's not fixing things, Mom. That's forgery. That's wire fraud on top of it, if anyone ever adds up what actually happened to the GoFundMe money too. Camille appeared at our mother's elbow in her wedding dress, eyes already wide, having caught the tail end of it. What settlement? Mom, what is she talking about? Nothing you need to worry about tonight. She's talking about $18,000 of my recovery fund that paid for your flower deposit. I said to Camille, gently, because none of this was actually her fault, and $275,000 a company gave away, because it was cheaper than admitting their new steering system already had a lag that killed someone once before. Somebody signed my name to accept it, it wasn't me. Camille went white under her makeup. I didn't know. I swear to God, Ren, I didn't know any of that. I believe you, I said and meant it, and watched some of the tension leave her shoulders, Right before I added, I think you just didn't ask. Because asking would have meant looking too closely at where the money for tonight actually came from. She didn't have an answer for that. To her credit, she didn't try to invent one. By 8:30, two of Griffin Calder's own board members, who'd come expecting a pleasant evening and a business connection, were quietly asking Weston pointed questions about the recall statement, lighting up their phones. By 8:45, the club's event coordinator was fielding a call from the Tribune reporter, who'd apparently decided a Calder family scandal breaking at a Gold Coast wedding was too good a Thursday to leave alone. By 9:00, my mother had gone from the woman glowing at the door to a woman standing alone near the gift table, holding a glass of champagne she'd stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier, while Grant's very correct, very unbothered parents pretended not to have heard any of it. Nobody yelled, that was the strangest part. I had spent years bracing for the version of this where somebody finally screamed, and instead it was just paper and timestamps and a room slowly, quietly rearranging itself around a truth that had been sitting in a kitchen folder the whole time, waiting for someone to open it. My mother found me once more before the night ended, by the coat check, her composure mostly rebuilt, wedding guest smile back in place for anyone still watching. You didn't have to do this tonight, she said. You could have waited, for Camille's sake. I did wait, I said. Longer than you'd think, from the folder to right now. I waited until I had every piece of paper I needed so nobody could ever tell me I imagined it. I picked up my own coat before she could reach for it. You said thank God it wasn't her before you ever asked if I was in pain. I've thought about that sentence almost every day for a month. Tonight's the first night I stopped needing you to take it back. I didn't wait for her answer. I don't actually know if she had one. 3 months later, Weston made me dinner in his apartment on a Tuesday that had no significance to anyone but us. Nothing plain or precious, just pasta and a salad he'd clearly underseasoned on purpose so I'd have to add exactly what I wanted. What do you want? He asked, nodding at the salt, actually. Not what you're supposed to want. Not what's easiest for everyone else in the room. Nobody had asked me that question and meant it, not really, in longer than I could remember. I thought about it honestly before I answered, which felt like its own kind of miracle. This, more salt. You, not looking away while I decide. No folder anywhere in this apartment I have to read upside down to understand my own life. He laughed and reached over and ran his thumb along the thin white line the 11 stitches had left in my hairline, the way he'd started doing without seeming to notice he did it. I didn't flinch away from it anymore. I hadn't in weeks. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Priya, who'd been promoted twice since spring and still backed up every file twice out of habit. Good news on the settlement refile, it said. Confirmed today. It's finally officially only ever been you. Weston read it over my shoulder and pressed his mouth, briefly, to the scar under his thumb. Thank God it's you, he said like it was its own kind of prayer, the exact opposite of the one my mother had once meant. I believed him, that was the difference. I believed him completely. My mother, Renee Sutter, is in a pretrial diversion program for the forgery now, paying back every dollar of the GoFundMe money with interest. Camille calls me on Sundays, no wedding logistics attached, just to talk. It isn't fixed between us. I don't think it's supposed to be. It's just finally honest, which turned out to be the thing I actually wanted all along. I did not have to earn my place at that table tonight. I was never the one who needed to be talked into staying. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.